My mother wrote letters for years and years to her psychiatrist, and I started publishing them on Kindle Vella. I'll put the links in the comments below, but I will give you an excerpt of one of her letters. This is from October 1st, 1981. Dear Dr. K, one of Julie's friends is staying the night tonight. They're watching TV in the living room and are not old enough to be shy about being in their PJs while Dee is in the room. The TV show is awful. I decided to write you a letter instead of watching it. There's a story I wanted you to know. I shall try to be brief. When I was around 22 years old, I was in supportive therapy with Dr. M. I say supportive because I think at that time I was paying for my therapy out of my earnings. I no longer wanted my parents to foot the bill for my therapy. For this reason, Dr. M had me go to the county hospital when I had another breakdown. Los Angeles County Hospital Psychiatric Unit during the early 60s was a bad scene. I was poor and mentally ill. That's where poor mentally ill people went. Prior to my hospitalization, when I was on the job hunting circuit, I had lamented to Dr. M I never knew what to put on job applications that said, "Have you been mentally ill or had a nervous breakdown?" He said, "Why don't you tell them you were temporarily regressed from the services of your ego?" That phrase pleased me. Sounded like a polite way of saying you're crazy. Hence the reason in LA County Psycho Ward, when a young med student with a clipboard who decided to interview me asked, "What's wrong with you?" I first became a tad angry. I was in that horrid hospital. If I knew what was wrong with me, I wouldn't be there. Then I realized I was there because I was crazy. I was angrier because this person wanted to interview me when I was in such a state. What right had he? Then the phrase came to my mind. I am temporarily regressed from the services of my ego, I told him. I can't recall what he said exactly, but I think he asked me what that meant, and I said, "It's a polite way of saying you're crazy." Then, a room with a table and some chairs and 3 men in it. When I went into the room, the men were standing. One of them was bending over some papers on the table. He identified himself as being a psychiatrist. He also introduced me to the other 2 men, but I don't recall if they were psychiatrists. Anyway, looking at the papers, he said, "It says here that you stated that you are temporarily regressed from the services of your ego." I told him that was right, and that I'd learned it from Dr. M, and that it was a polite way of saying one was crazy. He asked if Dr. M was my doctor, and I said yes, and he said he wished Dr. M would quit sending his patients there. I got mad and said, "Why shouldn't Dr. M send his patients there?" He didn't answer. Then one of the other men asked me, who was my ego? Now that seemed a dumb question. I figured he wanted me to say Dr. M was. So I said I was. Then on second consideration, I said God was. Then that man was looking at a paper. He read, "You say you are temporarily regressed from the services of your ego. When asked who your ego is, at first you said you were, then you said God is." That's right, I told him. And what that means is, I am temporarily regressed from the services of God. The first man, the psychiatrist, said, "Thank you," and I left. Next, I was in a courtroom, or at least what looked to me like a courtroom. There was a man in a black robe sitting up high, like in a courtroom. There were a bunch of benches in the back full of people. Toward the front was a table at which were seated my brother, my mother, and Father Barber, a friend of my brother's. Father Barber, an Episcopal priest, had his black outfit on with the collar on backwards. I thought I was going to be married. I asked the judge if there was going to be a wedding. He said no. My mother stood up and said in her best hysterical voice, "Betsy has been over-medicated." My brother confirmed there was to be no wedding. I was a bit relieved because I couldn't figure out who'd do the marrying, Father Barber, whom I'd hardly met, or the judge. It did occur to me there was no groom present. Anyhow, the judge looked at a paper and stated, "It states here you said you are temporarily regressed from the services of your ego, and when asked who your ego was, you said at first you were, and then you said God was." "That's right," I said. "And that means I'm temporarily regressed from the services of God." At which point I decided that's why Father Barber was there. I expected him to do something. He didn't. The judge sentenced me to Camarillo State Hospital. The trip there was strange. We were in a caged bus marked Sheriff. I felt I'd been bad, or that I was thought to be bad. Arriving at Camarillo, we were finally ushered into a long hallway where we sat on a bench. It was a nice enough hallway, pleasantly decorated. My turn came, and I was taken to an office with a man in it whom I assumed to be a psychiatrist. I looked at the pictures on his walls as he shuffled papers. Then he read, "It says here, you stated you are temporarily regressed from the services of your ego, and that when asked who your ego is, you first said you were, and then that God is." "That's right," I told him. "I am temporarily regressed from the services of God." "And how do you think we can help you here?" he asked. "I don't know," I yelled at him. "These places are nothing but schizo houses. Everybody takes on the personalities of everybody else." "You're probably right," he smiled. "Then fix it," I yelled. End of story. Peace. Love, Elizabeth. Note, I hesitated mailing this to you because of its length. Please know it wasn't all that easy to write. This story and various aspects have haunted me for years. I just wanted to get it out, and I wanted you to know it.